They told her the river was cursed. They said women who went there alone never came back the same, if they came back at all. Yet on that evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and shadows stretched across the earth, a young woman stood at the riverbank, barefoot, trembling, holding a bundle of clothes that were not even hers. She had been sent there deliberately, not for cleanliness, not for duty, but for punishment. And as the water moved quietly before her, she did not know that from the trees across the river, someone was watching. Not a villager, not a hunter, not a spirit, a man whose presence would turn her suffering into destiny. And by the time dawn arrived, nothing in that village would ever be the same again. Who was she, really? Why would a family send their own daughter to a river feared by generations? And who was the man hidden by the trees, the one whose eyes followed her every movement in silence? Was it chance? Or was this the moment fate had been waiting for all along? Stay with this story, because what begins as cruelty will unfold into a revelation that challenges everything we believe about suffering, justice, and reward. This is not just a story about a girl at a river. This is about how the worst night of your life might actually be the doorway to everything you were meant to become. Her name was Amara. She lived in a village where people remembered everything except kindness. Her mother had died when she was still young, and not long after, her father remarried. At first, the new woman smiled. She spoke softly. She promised care. But kindness that must announce itself is often the first to disappear. As years passed, Amara became invisible in her own home. She woke before sunrise. She slept after everyone else. She ate last, sometimes not at all. Her stepmother's real children wore bright clothes and learned songs. Amara learned silence. Yet there was something about her, a quiet dignity. Even in rags, she walked like someone who still believed life could be gentle. And that belief angered her stepmother more than disobedience ever could. Amara's father was a quiet man, worn down by life and loss. He had loved her mother deeply, and when she died giving birth to Amara, something in him died too. He worked long hours in the fields, came home exhausted, and asked no questions. When his new wife told him Amara was clumsy, he believed her. When she said Amara was ungrateful, he nodded. When she suggested Amara needed more discipline, he looked away. It was easier than confronting the truth. Easier than admitting he had brought a stranger into his home who saw his daughter as a threat. Amara never blamed him. She understood that grief makes people small, but understanding did not make the loneliness hurt any less. The stepmother had two daughters of her own, Clara and Beth. They were not cruel by nature, just spoiled by advantage. They had never known hunger, so they wasted food. They had never known cold, so they complained about the warmth of their blankets. They watched their mother treat Amara like a servant and said nothing, because silence is the easiest form of cruelty. Sometimes Clara felt a flicker of guilt when Amara brought her warm water to wash her face in the mornings. Sometimes Beth noticed how thin Amara had become. But guilt without action is just comfort for the guilty. And so the house continued as it was, a place where one girl worked and three others lived. Amara had one refuge, her mother's grave at the edge of the village. She would go there when the work was done, when the house was asleep, and she would sit on the cold ground and talk to the woman she barely remembered. She told her about the ache in her hands from scrubbing floors, about the hunger that made her dizzy, about the dreams she still had, foolish as they were, of being seen, of being valued, of being loved. She did not know if the dead could hear the living, but speaking into the silence made her feel less alone. And sometimes, when the wind moved through the trees just right, she imagined it was her mother's voice whispering back, "Keep going, keep going. Your story is not over yet." Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. One evening, the stepmother called her. Her voice was calm, too calm. "There is dirt on the family clothes," she said. "They must be washed tonight." At the river, Amara froze. Everyone knew what that meant. The river was far. The path was lonely. And night was coming. She tried to speak, but fear swallowed her voice. "Go," the woman said, "or don't come back." So Amara walked, each step heavier than the last. The forest grew thicker, the air colder, and by the time she reached the river, darkness had already claimed the sky. She knelt, and that was when she felt it, that unmistakable feeling that someone was watching. And that's when she realized this night would not end the way anyone expected. The path to the river was not meant to be traveled at night. Everyone in the village knew this. There had been stories for generations. Women who went to fetch water after dark and were found days later, confused and silent, unable to speak about what they had seen. Some said it was spirits. Others said it was wild animals. A few whispered about men who hid in the forest, waiting for women alone. But no one spoke of it openly, because to name a fear is to give it power. Amara knew all of this. She had heard the stories since childhood. And yet here she was, walking that forbidden path because her stepmother had commanded it. The bundle of clothes in her arms felt heavier with every step, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented. Punishment without reason, cruelty without cause. The trees on either side of the path seemed to close in as she walked. The sounds of the village, the distant laughter of children, the clatter of evening meals being prepared, all of it faded behind her. Now there was only the sound of her own breathing, quick and shallow, and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The sky above was bruised with twilight, deep purples and fading oranges, and she walked faster, hoping to finish before full darkness fell. But hope and reality are not always friends. By the time she reached the riverbank, the last light had been swallowed by the horizon. The moon had not yet risen, and the only illumination came from the faint glow of stars reflected on the water's surface. She knelt at the river's edge and dipped the first piece of clothing into the water. The cold shocked her hands, but she did not pull away. She scrubbed in silence, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere. She thought about her mother. She thought about the grave she would visit tomorrow if she survived tonight. She thought about the life she was living and wondered if it would ever change. And then she heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable. The snap of a twig, the shift of weight on dry leaves. Someone was there. She froze, her hands still submerged in the icy water, her heart hammering against her ribs. Slowly, she turned her head toward the trees across the river. The darkness was thick, impenetrable, but she felt it. Eyes on her. A presence. Watching. Waiting. Her first instinct was to run. But where? The village was far, and the path behind her was just as dangerous as whatever was ahead. Her second instinct was to scream. But what if that made it worse? What if the thing watching her was waiting for her to panic? So she did the only thing she could think of. She prayed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a whisper into the night. Mother, if you can hear me, if you're watching over me, please don't let me die here. Not like this. Not alone. And then, as if in answer, the wind shifted. The clouds parted, and the moon finally rose, casting pale silver light across the river. And that is when she saw him. Amara washed the clothes slowly. Her hands trembled from the cold water. Her thoughts drifted between fear and memory. She whispered prayers her mother once taught her, prayers for protection, for unseen mercy. Across the river, hidden among trees, a man stood still. He had been traveling for weeks, disguised in simple clothing, observing the land without revealing his identity. He had wealth. He had power. But tonight, he was captivated by something else. Grace. Not beauty. Not youth. Grace under pressure. He watched as Amara finished washing, wrung the clothes, and sat quietly by the river, not crying, not complaining, just enduring. Something in him shifted. The man's name was Daniel. He was the son of a wealthy landowner from the Eastern Territories, a man who had inherited vast estates and businesses, but had grown weary of the shallow world he inhabited. Everyone he met wanted something from him. Every conversation was a transaction. Every smile had a motive. So he had left, telling no one where he was going, dressing in plain clothes, and traveling through small villages to see how ordinary people lived. He wanted to understand struggle. He wanted to see character in its raw form, unpolished by wealth or status. And tonight, standing by this river, he was witnessing something he had never seen before. A young woman, clearly exhausted, clearly afraid, yet refusing to break. She worked with quiet determination. She prayed with genuine faith. And when she finally sat down on the riverbank, her shoulders did not slump in defeat. They straightened with resolve. Daniel had been taught all his life that strength was loud. That power announced itself. That greatness demanded attention. But watching Amara, he realized he had been taught wrong. Real strength was quiet. Real power was in endurance. Real greatness was in continuing when no one was watching, when no reward was promised, when the only witness was your own conscience. He found himself stepping closer, careful not to startle her, but unable to stay hidden. He wanted to know her story. He wanted to understand what kind of life produces this kind of character. And more than anything, he wanted to help. Not because he pitied her, but because he recognized something rare, something worth protecting. When his foot stepped on a dry branch, the crack echoed through the silence like a gunshot. Amara's head whipped around, her eyes wide with terror. Daniel raised his hands immediately, palms out, the universal gesture of peace. "Please don't be afraid," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." But Amara did not move. She had heard those words before, from people who hurt her anyway. Words were easy. Actions were truth. So she stayed frozen, her body tense, ready to run if needed. Daniel understood. He took a step back, giving her space. "My name is Daniel," he said. "I'm just a traveler. I was resting nearby when I heard someone at the river. I wanted to make sure you were safe." Safe? Amara's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a lifetime of doubt. "No one cares if I'm safe." The words came out before she could stop them, and immediately she regretted it. You do not tell strangers your pain. You do not show weakness to people you do not know. But Daniel did not laugh. He did not dismiss her. He simply nodded, as if he understood something she had not said. "Then they're fools," he replied quietly. "Because anyone who sees you here, doing what you're doing, would know you're worth caring about." Amara blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with kindness. Not with respect. She looked at him more carefully now, trying to see past the darkness, trying to understand who this stranger really was. Daniel moved slowly, respectfully, and sat down on a fallen log several feet away from her. He did not invade her space. He did not demand her trust. He simply offered his presence. "Why are you here?" he asked gently. "At night. Alone. This is not a safe place." Amara hesitated. Part of her wanted to lie, to protect her family's reputation, to hide the shame of her situation. But another part of her, the part that was tired of pretending, wanted to tell the truth. So she did. She told him about her mother's death, about her father's remarriage, about the stepmother who saw her as a burden, about the endless chores, the sleepless nights, the hunger, the invisibility, and about tonight, about being sent to the river as punishment for nothing, for existing, for being in the way. Daniel listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Not because he did not care, but because he was processing the injustice of it all. He had traveled through many villages. He had seen poverty. He had seen hardship. But this was different. This was cruelty disguised as family. This was abuse hidden behind closed doors. And it enraged him, not with loud anger, but with the quiet, determined kind. The kind that moves mountains. The kind that changes lives. "You should not be here," he said finally. "Not like this. Not alone. Not treated this way." Amara looked down at her hands, red and raw from the cold water. "It doesn't matter what should be," she said. "This is what is." The man stepped forward. Amara gasped, fear rising in her chest. But his voice was calm. "You should not be here alone." She bowed her head, expecting judgment. Instead, he listened. And when she finished telling her story, the man was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Sometimes, those sent away are being prepared to be found." He offered protection that night. By morning, arrangements were already in motion. Weeks later, the village would whisper. Months later, they would bow. Because the man by the river was not ordinary. He was the son of the wealthiest family in the region. And Amara had just stepped into a destiny her suffering prepared her for. Daniel did not make promises he could not keep. He did not offer fairy tales or empty hope. But he did offer something real. Safety for the night. A warm fire. Food. And in the morning, a choice. "You can go back to that house," he said. "Or you can come with me to the town where I'm staying. There are families there, good people, who need help with honest work. Work that pays. Work that respects you." Amara stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. Leave? Just leave? But what about her father? What about the only home she had ever known? Daniel saw the conflict in her eyes. "I know it's frightening," he said. "Change always is. But sometimes staying in a familiar hell is more dangerous than stepping into an unknown future." That night, Amara did not sleep. She sat by the fire Daniel had built, wrapped in a blanket he had given her, and she thought about her life. She thought about the years of suffering, The years of hoping things would get better. The years of believing that if she just worked harder, if she just stayed quieter, if she just became smaller, maybe she would finally be loved. But she had done all of that, and nothing had changed. The only thing that had changed was her. She had become a ghost in her own life. And ghosts do not get happy endings. So when morning came, when Daniel asked her what she had decided, she looked him in the eyes and said the bravest word she had ever spoken. Yes. The journey to the town took 2 days. Daniel walked beside her, never rushing, never complaining. He bought her food from vendors along the way. He made sure she had water. He treated her like a person, not a burden. And with every mile, Amara felt something shift inside her. Hope. Real hope. Not the fragile kind that breaks at the first disappointment, but the solid kind. The kind built on action, not wishes. When they arrived in the town, Daniel took her to a small inn run by an older woman named Margaret. "This is Amara," he said. "She's looking for work. She's trustworthy, hardworking, and deserves a chance." Margaret looked Amara up and down, not with judgment, but with the sharp assessment of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize character. "Can you cook?" she asked. Amara nodded. "Can you clean?" Another nod. "Can you be honest?" Amara met her eyes. "Always." Margaret smiled. "Then you're hired." The first few weeks were an adjustment. Amara worked at the inn, cleaning rooms, helping in the kitchen, serving guests. But this work was different. She was paid. She was fed. She had her own small room with a bed and a window. And most importantly, she was treated with respect. Margaret was firm but fair. She corrected mistakes without cruelty. She praised good work without exaggeration. And slowly, Amara began to remember what it felt like to be human. Daniel visited often. He claimed it was because the inn had the best food in town, but Amara suspected there was more to it. He would sit in the corner, reading or writing in a journal, and sometimes he would glance up and their eyes would meet. And in those moments, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, respect, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name yet. 3 months passed. Amara had saved enough money to buy herself new clothes, simple but clean. She had gained weight, her face no longer hollow with hunger. She smiled more. She laughed sometimes. And people in the town began to notice her, not because she was trying to be noticed, but because genuine joy is magnetic. One evening, as she was closing up the inn, Daniel appeared at the door. But he was not dressed in his usual simple clothes. He wore a fine coat, polished boots, and there was a carriage waiting outside. Amara frowned, confused. "What's happening?" she asked. Daniel took a breath, as if he had been preparing for this moment. "I need to tell you the truth," he said. "I'm not just a traveler. My family owns most of the land in this region. And I came here because I was tired of people who only saw my wealth. But you never asked me for anything. You never wanted anything from me except honesty. And that's why I need to ask you something now." Amara's heart was pounding. Daniel stepped closer. "I have been to many places. I have met many people. But I have never met anyone like you. You have endured more than most people could survive, and yet you have not become bitter. You have not become cruel. You have remained kind. And that is the rarest thing in this world." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I am not asking you to marry me today. I am not rushing you. But I am asking if you would allow me to court you properly, to know you, to let you know me. Because I believe that meeting you at that river was not an accident. I believe it was the moment everything in my life was leading to." Amara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of disbelief, of wonder, of a joy so overwhelming she did not know how to contain it. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why would someone like you choose someone like me?" Daniel smiled, and it was the most genuine smile she had ever seen. "Because you were not chosen by your family. You were not valued by the people who should have valued you most. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are worth choosing, that you always were." And in that moment, Amara understood. Her suffering had not been meaningless. It had been preparation. It had refined her, shaped her, made her into someone who could recognize real love when it finally arrived. Someone who would never take kindness for granted. Someone who would build a life not on bitterness, but on gratitude. Amara never returned to that house the same way again. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with transformation. The stepmother who sent her away watched as life lifted the one she tried to destroy. And the lesson echoed through generations. Not every door that closes is rejection. Some are redirection. Not every river is meant to drown you. Some are meant to cleanse your past. Amara and Daniel were married a year later. It was a quiet ceremony, attended by people who genuinely loved them, not people who wanted something from them. Margaret cried happy tears. The townspeople celebrated. And Amara wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, because she wanted to remember where she had come from, even as she stepped into where she was going. But before the wedding, Amara did something that surprised everyone. She went back to the village, not to gloat, not to show off, but to see her father. She found him in the fields, older and more worn than she remembered. When he saw her, he dropped his tools and stared, as if seeing a ghost. "Amara," he whispered. She nodded. They sat together under a tree, and for the first time in her life, he really listened. She told him everything. The years of mistreatment, the loneliness, the night at the river, and the man who had changed everything. Her father wept, not the quiet tears of grief, but the loud, broken sobs of regret. "I failed you," he said. "I was so lost in my own pain that I did not see yours. I let her hurt you. I let them all hurt you. And I will carry that shame until I die." Amara could have agreed with him. She could have let him drown in his guilt. But she did not, because she had learned something in her suffering. Bitterness only poisons the person who carries it. "You failed me," she said quietly. "But I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." Her father looked at her with a mix of awe and sorrow. "You are stronger than I ever was," he said. Amara shook her head. "No, I just decided that my past does not get to write my future, and neither does anyone else." She stood to leave, and her father grabbed her hand. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Amara paused. "If you want to, but only if you're ready to see me as I am now. Not as the girl you ignored, not as the daughter you failed, but as the woman I became in spite of it all." The stepmother, meanwhile, had heard about Amara's return. She had heard the rumors about the wedding, about the wealthy man, about the life Amara was building, and it ate at her, not because she loved Amara, but because she could not stand to see the girl she had tried to break now flourishing. She came to the inn where Amara was staying, her face tight with forced politeness. "I heard you were getting married," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I wanted to congratulate you." Amara looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something she had never seen before. Fear. The stepmother was afraid. Afraid that Amara would take revenge. Afraid that Amara would use her new position to destroy the family. Afraid that cruelty, finally, had consequences. But Amara did not want revenge. She wanted freedom. "Thank you," she said simply. The stepmother waited, expecting more. Expecting anger, accusations, punishment. But Amara just stood there, calm and unmoved. Finally, the stepmother could not stand it anymore. "Are you not going to say anything else?" she demanded. "Are you not going to remind me of everything I did to you?" Amara smiled, but it was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of someone who had already moved on. "Why would I?" she asked. "You are not part of my story anymore. You were just a chapter. A painful one. But chapters end. And I am writing new ones now. Ones where you do not exist." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving the stepmother standing alone, confronted by the emptiness of her own cruelty. The wedding day was beautiful. The sun was warm. The flowers were in bloom. And as Amara stood beside Daniel, speaking vows of love and partnership, she thought about the girl she used to be. The girl who knelt by a cursed river, terrified and alone. And she thought about the woman she had become. Strong, free, loved, not because life had been kind to her, but because she had refused to let unkindness define her. After the ceremony, as they walked through the town, people cheered. Children threw flower petals. And an old woman, a stranger, grabbed Amara's hand and whispered, "You give the rest of us hope, child. You remind us that suffering is not the end." Amara squeezed her hand. "No," she said. "It's just the beginning of something better." Years passed. Amara and Daniel built a life together. They had children. They ran businesses. They supported their community. But Amara never forgot where she came from. She started a shelter for women and children who had nowhere to go, who were being mistreated, who needed a safe place to rebuild their lives. She called it the River House, because she wanted to remind people that even the darkest nights can lead to new dawnings. She employed women who had been cast aside. She educated children who had been denied schooling. and she made sure that no one in her care ever felt invisible again. People called her generous. They called her kind. But Amara knew the truth. She was not special. She had just decided that her pain would not be wasted, that her story would be used to help others write better endings to theirs. One evening, many years later, Amara returned to the river where it all began. She stood on the same bank, older now, grayer, but still standing. She thought about the girl she had been, the fear, the loneliness, the uncertainty, and she thought about the life she had built since then, the love, the purpose, the peace. She knelt down and dipped her hand into the water, just as she had done all those years ago. But this time, she was not washing away dirt. She was washing away the last remnants of bitterness, the last traces of anger, the last whispers of why me, because she finally understood. It had to be her, because she was strong enough to survive it, and kind enough not to repeat it. So now I ask you, what would you have done if you were Amara? Would you have had the courage to leave? Would you have found it in your heart to forgive? Do you believe destiny finds us, or do our darkest moments lead us to it? Think about the people in your own life who have been cast aside, overlooked, or mistreated. What if they are waiting for someone to see them the way Daniel saw Amara? What if you were supposed to be that person? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, where are you watching from? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever been sent to your own river, only to find that it was leading you somewhere better? I want to hear your stories. Because this is not just Amara's story. This is the story of anyone who has ever been underestimated, undervalued, or overlooked. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that your suffering is not the end of your story, then subscribe for more timeless tales, stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Stories that remind us all that we are stronger than we know, braver than we believe, and worthy of love, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise.